Welcome to the August the 11th taping of It Happened in Grand Prairie as we bring back history memories of old Grand Prairie. This is history tape number 22, and we're very excited about the young lady that we have with us today, Camilla Poindexter Patterson, a long-time resident of Grand Prairie, Texas. And Camilla, welcome to the show today.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Wonderful. It's wonderful you have a well-known name in the annals of Grand Prairie history. The Poindexter name goes back way back in history, and we'd like to start the show today by you're going back and telling us a little bit of your genealogy. If you'd start out with, first of all, start out with your parents, both of their names, and then we'll go back with your mother's parents and your dad's parents. All right. Who was your mother?
My mother was Maud Taft, and my father was William Wesley Poindexter. He was one of 5 brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother was born here. Then her parents went to, both were school teachers, and they went to Indian Territory when she was a small child. She had 2 older brothers, but unfortunately her mother died when she was 6 years old, and then it wasn't quite, hadn't even been a year, then she lost her father. So then she was brought back to Grand Prairie by her mother's sister and her husband, Bill King.
Bill King.
That's right.
Was your mother's
Uncle.
sister, your mother's uncle?
That's right.
Wonderful. Okay.
Yeah, Mrs. King and my grandmother Taft were sisters.
I see.
So she was raised with the King children, the daughters and the one son.
Now, I noticed that the name Taft is T-A-F-F-E-E. That is T-A-F-T-A-A-F-F-E. That's a very unusual name. Do you know the lineage of that?
Well, that's directly from Ireland. We met a Roman Catholic priest once upon a time that came over from Ireland by that name, and he said most generally when you saw that spelling that there would be some kind of connection among all of the Tafts. I think in Ireland they pronounce it Ta.
Ta.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Ta.
All right, now we have the record of your mother and how she came here with her parents, then her parents left for the Indian Territory, but she came back and lived with Mr. King, her relative. Now, tell me about Mr. William Wesley Poindexter, about his family, a little bit about that, would you?
All righty. His parents and grandparents were also born here, and of course they grew up on the farm. And I remember one time when Daddy was visiting us, which I did not know some years ago, that his father drove a team of oxen, and I guess that was in the beginning when there was a lot of house building going on, but he'd go to East Texas and get loads of lumber, you see, and bring it back. He did that in addition to his farming. And of course after Mother and Daddy married, why, they settled in town, and he worked originally for the cement company.
Gifford Hill.
And then for years he worked for L.O. Turner at that time down in Grand Prairie. It was a huge, I remember that when I was a little girl. They had the furniture store on one side, the hardware store on the other side, and then in the back, of course, was the mortuary. We didn't have funeral homes. And
It had a mortuary instead of a funeral home.
yeah,
Right.
back there in those days. So he worked there for a number of years. Then he went from that then to into the grocery business.
And where was the grocery business that he went into?
Well, he was working for a private individual. He was the manager of it.
All right.
And then he worked for Safeway for a while. And then when Mr. Sargent came into town, he taught him how to, about the grocery business.
All right.
And then he worked for the A&P for a while. And he was one of those that he can stay retired until his health got where he would have to. But all of the old timers, and some, you know, that were new here, they always remember who Uncle Bill is.
And they called him Uncle Bill.
Bill, because he made friends with all of them, and he'd tell the young brides how to cook, help them buy their produce, and then tell them how to prepare it.
How to prepare it, yes. All right, now, the Poindexter family that lived where in Grand Prairie that were farmers? Your dad, when he lived on the farm, where was this located?
Oh, well, as I said, I don't remember the names in those days, but it was out in the country. And the Poindexter estate was taken in with the at Mountain Creek Lake.
With the Dallas Power and Light Company, Mountain Creek Lake, that is now by the Naval Air Station. Their old farm was down in that area.
Yeah.
And that's where your dad and his parents lived when they were farmers.
Yes, and then Uncle B continued farming there, you know, and then Uncle and Grandmother lived with Grandmother Poindexter. She was my only grandparent that I ever knew, was she. And then, oh, I can remember all the good homemade sausage and pork chops and backbones. And then Uncle Clyde was, my mother's brother, was a cotton farmer.
That's Uncle Clyde Taft. All right, he was a cotton farmer, and where was his farm?
It was out south of town, just before you cross the bridge to where the school is. And he raised...
Near the Florence Hill community? Wonderful. Yeah. And what he raised?
Well, he was principally a cotton farmer, but he also raised turkeys. So every Thanksgiving and Christmas, we always had a big turkey. And then at Christmas time, we'd have Christmas trees from his farm, as well as the native pecans and everything. We were all real close. We spent time together all the time. If we weren't with them, they were at our house.
All right, now, do you have any memories of how your parents met? How this Maud Taft met William Wesley Poindexter?
Oh, she was visiting one of her friends, and she said that here came my father, had a beautiful white horse. He supposedly was a very fine, I've heard that from a number of people, that he was a fine horseman, you know. And he came galloping up, you know, and it started from there.
And they started courting, and then they married.
Yes.
Do you know the date that they married by any chance?
No,
That's all right.
I don't remember now.
That's back in the dark ages, isn't it? All right. And from this marriage with Maud and Uncle Bill, as all of them called him, how many children did they have?
Well, 3 that lived. My sister was the oldest.
And what was her name?
Nina Illen.
Nina Illen.
That is an Irish name, E-O-L-I-N-E, family name. And then my brother was Joseph Taft. And then I came along a number of years later.
You were the baby, the baby of the family. Well, wonderful. Now, your sister, I believe, and you were involved with your mother in an accident that took her away from this world. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your mother?
Well, my sister wasn't with us. She had come back. She had been working in College Station, but she had just recently returned. But she was out at some friend's house. But it was my niece, Betty Jo.
Oh, it was your niece, Betty Jo, that was with her. Okay.
And the 2 little neighborhood boys, Ford boys, that lived next door to us, and I had a girlfriend, Elizabeth Ballstick, to spend the night with me. And we had been to see Shirley Temple and the Little Colonel. I'll never forget it. And my father always worked late, but he waited for us. And we were all walking home. And of course, my mother, ever since I was big enough to remember, always cautioned us about the trains. But this was a sunshine special, and it always came down that grade and picked up speed. And all of us children went ahead first. And Mother immediately started after us. She had cleared the tracks, but she had on a light spring coat, and the suction of the train drew her back onto the cow catcher, and of course it snuffed her life out immediately. It was a very tragic thing.
Yes, it was. And how old were you when you lost your mother then?
It was 10 days before my 16th birthday.
That was a very traumatic happening for you,
Very.
wasn't it? All right, now following that, your dad continued working in Grand Prairie, and did you girls just manage on your own then and without Mommy?
Well, I was a pretty big girl. Of course, I
Yes.
had help from some girlfriends after school would come and help
Yes.
me get through in a hurry, you know, so we could go play.
Yes.
And Betty was 10.
Betty Jo Wilson.
Yeah, we all lived together, you see. And of course, the three of us are living in the old home place now.
Now tell us about the location of the old home place, because that's very important to us.
The one we're,
The old Poindexter
Yeah.
home place that you were raised in.
well, we are on the corner of Southwest 4th Street and Dallas Street. It's just right across the street from the new LTV Federal
LTV Federal Credit Union.
Credit
building.
Union. And
And your niece Betty Jo
Was born
Wilson
there.
Donovan lives with you there.
well, we all lived together. She was born in that house.
Well, we're sad that she couldn't be with us today. She's working, and we would have liked to
Yeah.
have had her in on this interview. It
Well,
would have
I'm
been
sorry she couldn't make
very
it.
exciting. Well, now that we've gotten through some of the family and all of the good things, and know that part of your grandparents lived in Florence Hill, part of them had an estate farm down in the area of the Mountain Creek Lake. Now let's get back to some old photographs that you have of Grand Prairie, Texas, and we know that if the camera can zoom in on this, that this is a photograph of an old cafe in downtown Grand Prairie. And you think that this is the cafe of the man that is standing in the doorway. And can you give us his name again?
Denny Moore, but I'm not quite sure because this was before my time. But he did have a big rattle, and it looks like about the same location. He had a big restaurant, and
You don't remember what side of the street this was on? Was it on
it
Main
was on
Street
the
or
south.
Jefferson?
It was on Main,
It was on Main Street and on the south side.
That's right.
Okay.
And then
Well,
there-
maybe if someone in our viewing audience sees this, they may recognize this, and we hope that they'll call us and add to our history, because we're doing this as a sesquicentennial project.
Well, it shows Denny Moore standing there in the door, and there's Jim Powers is in the background, and the others are too blurred for me to tell, but of course that's little Harry Turner, who Betty and I just adored when he was a little girl.
Darling little midget, wasn't he?
A dwarf.
A dwarf. All right. There is a difference.
Yes.
All right. Now, you mentioned Uncle Bill that took your mother in after her parents died in the Indian Territory, and I believe this is a picture of Uncle Bill right in the middle of this picture.
That is
isn't it?
right. It was on one of his birthdays. He lived to be 92 years old.
And give us his full name one more time.
It was William R. King. I don't remember
William
what the
R. King. And his wife is not in this picture.
No, she was deceased.
She was deceased, and he lived to be how old?
92.
And where was his home here in Grand Prairie, Texas?
It was on Center Street as you go out toward the cemetery.
All right. And on Center Street, and just as you get to Grand Prairie Road, there is the old Thomas home
Yes.
that is now the Thomas Wright home. Where is it located in proximity to it?
Well, just before you get
To the bend in the road?
to the bend in the road, the two-story house, it's right on the corner. And right across then is the old Thomas house. And as you go around the curve, but that right there is,
It is now still a two-story
it is still
home.
there.
Okay, we'll look that one up and do some research on that. And I believe your parents are in this picture. Now, this is a very exciting picture that you think it may be a Grand Prairie building.
I think
And,
so. but
all
I
right,
don't
if anyone in our viewing audience knows the history of this building or knows of its location in Grand Prairie, we hope that you'll call us on this, which is our history picture number 3 in this series. We'd like to know if this really is a part of Grand Prairie, Texas, And we really thank you for bringing that to us today. All right, now, that's the history of downtown Grand Prairie, but let's get to your school history. That's so exciting because, Camilla, I believe you even have your first grade picture. Would you like to hold that up and let our camera pick up the first grade class?
Well, no, this is the kindergarten.
That's the kindergarten class.
In those days, 25, the kindergarten was part of the school system.
Uh-huh.
And I went from kindergarten then into the first grade, second grade.
Into the second grade.
Because it was pretty, and these, a lot of the old timers here, Bobby Shanks and Dow Douthit and all of those that.
They're in that picture. All right, now, who was your teacher in this kindergarten class?
Alice Turner.
Alice Turner was
Yeah.
the kindergarten teacher. Okay, now we're getting up, and I believe this is your second grade class?
Third grade.
Your third grade class, and who is your teacher in this?
That's Hazel Rhodey.
Hazel Rhodey was the
Yeah.
teacher in this. Are there any in this picture that are still here in Grand Prairie, Texas? Is Bob Shanks or
Yes,
some
Bob-
of those?
Oh, yes, and
He's a
Doris
builder.
Sanders. Yeah, he's a builder now. And, well, some of them, of course, they come back frequently to Grand Prairie, but their homes are elsewhere now, like the Copeland girl,
Uh-huh.
Miss Doyle.
Miss Doyle that lives in San
Yes,
Antonio.
yeah.
All right, now we're going to have to get to your graduating class. When you were in the Grand Prairie schools, can you mention some of your other teachers? And did you go to the old school that was up on College Street, the 11th grade
That
school?
was the only one.
The only one in town, wasn't it? Okay.
Oh, yeah, started in kindergarten right through graduation,
All right, now tell us about your graduating class. What year?
1936.
1936. And how many were in your class? Do you remember?
Oh, very few, about 20.
About 20. All right, we're going to hold up your graduating class picture, and you're going to maybe name drop and tell us maybe some of the people that are in this.
Well, that's Marie Jasper. Of course, that's Mr. Roberts.
Mr. Roberts was the superintendent?
Yes, and that's
right.
Miss Wagner. She is now deceased, who was our room teacher. And that's Edith Burton, Hinton boy, and that's Frank Fagan. And
Are any of these in Grand Prairie, Texas now that you can
I
point
think
out?
Marie Jasper is, or in the area anyway. I see them every now and then, you know, when
All right. Now, another exciting one, before your class of 36, when you graduated, I believe this is one of the pep squads, and that was very unusual that we would have the, and what year do you think that this was of the pep squad?
Oh, that was around 34 or 5.
34 or 5.
But I thought it was funny for the contrast to what they are now and what they were then. The sweaters were so long that we had to cut them off. You know, you just ordered them, they were all one length. But,
And the skirts were sort of long, weren't
yeah.
they? Who was your sponsor for the pep squad?
That was Miss English.
Miss English was the pep squad sponsor during that time. Well, of all of the times that you were in Grand Prairie High School and in the school system, who was your very favorite teacher of all, Camilla?
Oh, I had a number of them. I really thought a lot of Mr. Poole, Larry Poole. He was a coach, but also taught history. He was a fine person. He taught us so much more than books. And then Mrs. Sanders, of course, that was in my elementary. She still lives here, by the way. Fine teacher. And
Well, which one inspired you the most to do whatever you wanted to do? Who do you think motivated you the most to become successful?
well, I really in that time it was so small that we got a lot of individual help. It would be hard to single anyone out. I loved them all
Okay.
and respected them.
All right, now following high school, how did your life turn? Did you work or out of the home, or did you become a homemaker?
Well, I worked in at St. Paul's Hospital for a number of years. That was during the war.
What did you do?
Well, I started off as a volunteer, you know, the Red Cross. And the nuns, I worked at St. Paul's, they asked me to take training so that I could work directly with them because you were restricted what you could do as a Red Cross aide. So I really became involved with that and just enjoyed it so much. And then after the war, well, Robert came to Grand Prairie because while he was away in the Navy, well, his parents opened up a dress shop here in Grand Prairie. It was a Patterson Smart Shop, whether you remember it or not.
Yes.
So we got acquainted and started courting, and then we married.
Then you married Mr.
Yes.
Bob Patterson. Wonderful. Do you all
Yeah.
have any children?
No, we didn't.
No
Or-
children. Betty Jo Wilson is your adopted child, so to
Yeah,
speak.
and her
then,
children.
And her children.
She
That's
has some
wonderful.
fine children and grandchildren.
Well,
so-
following your marriage, did you work out of the home, or did you were you a
Well,
homemaker?
Off and on, we moved to Snyder after our marriage. He had had his first law office there in Snyder. And I worked for a doctor there, and then I helped him in the law office, secretary.
And he was an attorney.
Yes.
What kind of an attorney was he?
Just general
Just
practice.
general practice. Okay.
And of course, we were politically minded.
Yes.
Of course, I learned that at my mother's skirts. She was, and we were very active in our party. And he represented the district in the legislature 2 terms, and served there in the community as city judge and county judge special. And we had a very fine
So
life.
you wore lots of different hats then, as the wife of a
Yeah.
legislator, the wife of an attorney, the wife of a judge. You've seen lots of good things go by the mill. And then when
yeah.
did you come back to Grand Prairie, Texas, Camilla?
Well, we didn't come back until, I guess it was late fall of '79. By that time, my sister was very ill.
And that's Betty Jo's mother. All right.
And so we came back for us to help look after her, you know. And of course, we lost her 5 years ago this month, but we've just continued to stay on. It's been nice seeing all the old timers that are still here, you know.
And what do you do to keep your life busy these days?
Well, I'm not as active as I used to be. I just try to keep the home going when Betty works. And I like yard work when it's not too hot to get out. And
Well, do you get together
Go
with
to
any of
church.
the old timers now?
well, unfortunately, no. The only time I see them, I hate to tell you, is mostly at funerals.
Yes. Well, tell me about your church activities, where you go to church.
Well, we go to St. Bart's Episcopal Church in Arlington. And
And are you involved in their works?
yes, and we have a Bible class every Wednesday. And of course, we have church services, and then we have Bible class. And there's always, just like all churches, an awful lot to do.
Yes. Now, when you were a young lady in Grand Prairie before you married Mr. Bob, and you were downtown, who were some of the people in Grand Prairie that really impressed you, maybe as leaders in Grand Prairie, Texas, during the time you were growing up, other than your school affiliation?
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, there was Dewey.
Dewey Miller.
Dewey Miller.
Did you ever go to the Dewey Miller drugstore then?
Oh, I grew up there.
Oh, you grew up at Miller Drug. Okay.
And there was Mr. Page,
Mr. J.Y. Page, who had the
variety store.
variety store,
That's
a
right.
5 and 10 cent variety store.
That's right.
All right.
And then, of course, there was the Turners, Mr. L.O. and Mr. Uncle Harry. Of course, I always called him Uncle Harry.
Is that because your dad worked with
Yes,
him in
and-
his hardware
and
store?
they were pretty close, you know. And then there was Mr. Lucas, who had the dry goods store there.
Yes, the Dry Goods Lucas family. Okay.
Just to name a few.
And any of the others that your dad worked with that impressed you as being leaders? How about leadership in the ladies in the town? Of course, you missed that portion by losing your mother when you were 16. But do you remember any of the ladies that were in leadership in Grand Prairie at that time, or were they sort of just in the background?
Well, sort of. Of course, Mother was active, And of course, she was a big PTA in the mission, and she belonged to a couple of clubs. And then, of course, when I grew up, I was active in clubs. I was in the League of Women Voters and, you know, things like that. And I remember Mrs. Lowe,
The librarian.
the librarian, our first library. You don't know how grateful that we were to have it.
Do you remember the library then when it was above Hancock Drugs, or oh, did you visit that library? Tell us a little bit about it. Was that on the south side of Main Street?
On the south side, we used to went up there and picked your books and registered.
Well, now, in
And then-
Mr. Hancock's drugstore, did he have a fountain like they had over at
yes.
Miller Drug?
Oh, yes.
That was before Dewey Miller came in with his fountain? And did all the kids congregate there and then go up and read books, or?
Well, like, you know, kids do. Of course, when we were teenagers, our main meeting place was the Luton's Drive-In, right
Luton's
downtown.
Drive-In.
Yeah.
Now, did Luton have a drive-in? Where was this located? I knew there was a Luton's Cafe, but I didn't know there was a Luton's Drive-In. Good. Tell us where
Well,
that
it
was
was the
located.
same thing, restaurant and, you know, drive-in, right across the street where the theater is now. Of course,
Yes.
it's built in there. But that's where we...
Everyone would drive in there and hang out at Luton's Cafe and socialize.
They had the best sandwiches you ever saw. Remember Jimmy Pengelly and Paul Mangrum, and of course Dolly at Luton and Mr. Luton. They were such wonderful people. And Mary Tom and I were very good friends, and we'd usually stop by there right after school, you know. But that was our main.
The
meeting
football
place.
games, you attended all the
Oh,
football
yeah.
games as one of the pep squad. And,
Yeah.
and who was the arch enemy of Grand Prairie during the time that you were going to school? Was it the Irving Tigers or someone else?
Oh, in my time it was Arlington.
Oh, it was the Arlington group. They were the bad ones, weren't they? All right, and speaking of football and everything, I believe we have an old photograph here of a football team, apparently, in Grand Prairie, Texas.
It is.
And we don't know the coach's name. We know that John Stanley is on the back row, and I imagine Francis P. Williams could tell us probably some of these people. So if any of y'all in video land recognize this football team and where the picture was taken, and we believe that it was taken in the rear of the old building at 202 College Street, and there are a couple of houses that are either to the east or the west, and we need to identify those. So we hope that Camilla, by bringing these pictures and the picture of the building downtown that we hope is downtown Grand Prairie, that you will have added very much to our history today.
Well, I hope
and
so.
even though you have not been in Grand Prairie continuously, the fact that you started here, both grandparents were here,
That's right.
and your parents had established themselves here in this town, we appreciate so much your coming and sharing your memories with us. And if we knew how to sing the song Thanks for the Memories, we probably would do that for you today. And we want to thank you for the time.
Well, thank you.
And thank Betty Jo for sharing some of these things with us. And one of these days we're going to get back to Betty Jo
Oh,
when she
fine.
gets a little age on her. See, she's so young now for us. And this is Ruthie Jackson reminding you that history is as we live and do.